Today, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about putting the alloy gearbox for the 22s on the Losi drag car. So, if you guys don't mind, tune in and we'll get this thing to go faster. So as you can see, I've already went ahead and removed the motor plate, slipper eliminator and the pinion. Now I'm going to remove the bottom shock mount screws on either side, and that'll allow this to fall down and your dog bones to come out. I'll be removing 2 screws from the top of the transmission case and in there, as well as 2 screws that are underneath the body mount back here, along with some screws from underneath. As I take them out, I will show you guys what I'm doing. So if you can see, now I have the bottom of the shock pulled off, which allows your rear A-arm to fall down. So you can just pull it down and lift the dog bone out of the cup there. So now, as you can see, I've got the body mount removed. Now it's time to take this screw and this screw out, along with this screw and this screw. If you don't have all these wires in here, it is a lot easier to pull that off. Okay, now it's time to remove these 4 screws from here, and that should get it to where your transmission is loose. Now that I've got that done, I'm going to pull up on this here just a little bit. Not so much to where it stresses this real bad, but I'm going to lift it up just a bit here and slide that transmission up. Just like that. There's your transmission. Okay, now that we've got this removed here, I'm going to remove my small shaft bushing here. Now what we're going to do, since we've got this all pulled apart here, is we're going to remove these 3 screws, and that allows your case to be pulled apart. Be mindful, my cups are a little bit boogered up here, so that does make it a little bit challenging to get the case apart. What I have done is I've taken a flat file and just barely rubbed it over the edges of these to knock the burrs down so it slides apart really easily. When you get all them screws out, I put my finger on the slipper shaft here, the top shaft if you will, and just pull it apart like that. Now you have some distinct parts here, your differential. Also, you have your idler gear here. Now when you pull this apart, you want to make sure that all of your bearings come out as well. This here is your top shaft, and there is a bearing in there as well you'll have to pull out. So how I'm going to pull this bearing out of here is I'm just going to take my 2 mil, 1.5, either one, and I'm just going to set it in there behind that race and just very gently roll it around. And then it should work its way out of there. Just be very gentle with it. You don't want to ruin your bearing. There it is. Now that's everything we need out of this old case. This is the part number 2081. Some Exotek decals. That's your aluminum casing. I forgot to mention, on your differential there are some bearings here and here. Make sure that those come out with your differential. If not, pull them out of your other case and put them on this. It is also imperative that you clean this off. Get it nice and clean and free of grease. All of it, all your gears. When you put it in your aluminum case, you're going to want new grease in here. That way you're not using grease with metal shavings or other things. Other contaminants. Okay, now that I have everything pretty well cleaned up, I'm going to use a little bit of this red and tacky grease, and I'm going to lightly coat my bearings and put them in the case. I might put a little bit in the case as well. And then I'm going to lightly coat all of my gears, all of my bearings, and all of my bushings. So be very careful when you pull this top shaft off. There is a small shim that goes here, and it is outlined on this. Loose is better than tight. Tight will cause overheating. So the way that I do all of my greasing is I take just a dab of it on my finger, just kind of coat the gear Just give it a real thin coat. Okay, so I went through and I lined the inside of my case with grease, just a very light application. I made sure to pay attention to the bearing race surfaces in there. Anywhere that a bearing or a shaft is going to sit, I made sure to put some grease in there. Now, too much grease is not necessarily a good thing. Too much grease can also cause overheating. So be very mindful of how much you're putting in and where you're putting it at. I'm just paying special attention to my bearing races and anywhere that a pin that has a rotating mass is going to sit. So I've got all of my gears, aside from my differential, greased, lubed up, and ready to go. I threw a little bit of grease in here just to make sure that the gears, a little bit of lubrication in there. Everything's moving perfect. It's not binding up, it's not noisy. Perfect. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reinstall my 3 screws here. Again, always remember your Loctite. So what I've done is I put my screws in there just a little bit, half thread or so, to keep the threads lined up. See, that way I can remove it, and it kind of keeps my place there. That way I know what screw goes where, just like that. And again, after I get everything tightened down here, I'm gonna rotate it, make sure everything's rotating freely, and it is. It's rotating really good. Now, obviously, you're just gonna reverse the steps to put it back in the car. We're going to get this put back in here. So I'm gonna lift up on this a little bit. Get her slid back in there. Some sort of in place here. Here we go. Now that's perfect. Make sure to Loctite these if you're doing this. The long screws go to the back. Short screws go to the front of this piece here. Alright, so after you get all those together, next thing we're going to install is going to be our motor plate. Now, the reason I'm putting my motor plate in now is because we can always put the dog bones in after we get this installed. At this point, I'm going to ensure that this bushing's in. I've already put Loctite on my motor screws. Remount my motor. Just in case you guys are wondering, these 4 screws here also need Loctite, because again, they are all going into aluminum. So after that, I didn't have to unscrew my shocks because I don't have washers on these. I would much rather if I wreck my shock pop off and it breaks something. I've had some instances where I've wrecked and I had a washer on the other side of this right here. I had a washer here to hold this in place, and it ended up bending one of my dog bones. So I do not run them with the washer anymore, because I would rather it pop these off and me lose the race and be able to pop them back on, rather than it not pop off, bend a dog bone, and me be out for the race. So anyway, these need Loctite. The motor screws need Loctite. These 2 screws here Loctite. Do not Loctite the 2 screws that are in your body mount, because these are going into plastic. If you're running the R-Design rear shock mount, you're going to Loctite these 2 screws in here and the 2 front screws on the bottom. If not, these underneath here go to plastic, and these 2 here go into plastic as well if you're not running the R-Design. And then the rear 2, if you do this,
need Loctite.
Alright guys, so I really hope that I helped you guys put this Exotek transmission case in your Losi 22s drag. And if you guys want, go check out a few more videos on my channel. I will have an RC playlist here, and this is my latest upload. Also, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks y'all.